Jo, we're talking about the subject of depression, and one of the things I wanted to ask you was, before you tell us about your first experience of it, a lot of people experience depression in different ways. What was your physical and emotional and mental experience of it during the times that you had it?
Obviously low in mood. I would be very tearful, anxious. I felt very low in energy, so I would spend a lot of time, not necessarily a lot of time sleeping, but I wouldn't go out and do things. I wouldn't want to go and do things, which is not how I am normally at all. And the impact was more mental than anything else, though, I would say. So I would feel very uncomfortable about being with people or talking to people. So yeah, it was obviously, as a result of that, it was very isolating, or could be at times.
When did you first experience depression, and what made you realize it was more than just feeling a bit low? Or perhaps you didn't realize that at the time.
No, I don't think I did. I think the first time I remember, looking back, I think I was depressed was when I was in my final year at university. I was doing an English degree at Leeds, and I got very, very stressed. And for me, I think that the thing that's in the past has triggered, in terms of depression, has been anxiety, or my experience of anxiety and stressful events happening, and then how I've responded to them. So when I was doing my finals, I was also seeing a boyfriend who wasn't very kind, actually, looking back, and I got very miserable and stressed and upset and so on at the time. And I thought, well, because I'd never experienced it before, I didn't know really. I think now I would know straight away and think, right, I need to look after myself and so on. At the time, I just thought, I just have to get through this on my own. Like, this is just what life is like, and that's just what I have to deal with. And then the following year, I think, or that same year, but later in the year, I seem to remember feeling much the same. And I can't remember now whether it was at that point or later on in life, about 5 years later, that I first sought medical treatment. I went to see my GP. But yeah, at the first occasion, really, I would say, when I experienced depression, I didn't realise that was what it was.
And then in the times that you experienced it later, were you able to find the triggers and say, yes, that's what's caused it? Because you've mentioned stress, that's obviously one of them.
No, I think at the time I wasn't. Events would seemingly pile up on me at the time, and wasn't really what was going on, but there were different things going on, and I would get stressed by one thing, and then anything else that happened, or I'd become anxious about something, and then anything else that happened just went on top of it. So it sort of it seemed to overtake me, as it were. But now that isn't how I see it now, but that's how it was at the time. So it wasn't like I was aware of it at the time and thought, oh, that's what's going on now, this is what I need to do. It was more that things piled up, or seemed to pile up, and then then I'd suddenly think, oh my goodness, I feel absolutely terrible, and then that could last for weeks or months, that experience.
And during those periods, how did you feel about sharing how you were feeling with those around you, family and friends?
I think I did talk about it with my family and my close friends, I think, but I wasn't terribly, I didn't have any sort of insight into it, at least initially. So it wasn't like I could say, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I need to be doing. It was more me having an experience of being extremely anxious and overwhelmed and needing to tell people about that. But then there wasn't anything that I saw that they could do. I don't know if it was me who thought of going to the GP, or that my family said go to see the doctor, but in the end I did. At one point I was married, and when my marriage ended, I became very anxious and depressed, and at that point I did go and see the GP, and I was prescribed antidepressants, which at the time I really didn't want to take. And then the doctor said, well, what have you got, who was also a friend of the family, said, what have you got to lose? So at that point I thought, yes, fair enough. And they were at dealing with the issue then and there.
The thing with antidepressants is that any medication will have its side effects.
Mm.
So have you found any difficulties with taking antidepressants yourself?
No, I mean, one of the reasons that I was apprehensive about taking them is it says it can, the one I was taking, which was, I think it was called sertraline, um, which is an SSRI, and I forget what that stands for, but it's of the same family, I believe, as Prozac and those kind of drugs. But what it said was that it could make you feel anxious
Mm-hmm.
and depressed. And I thought, well, I don't, that doesn't sound like a very good idea because I'm already feeling like that anyway. So you take them for a couple of weeks before you really notice the difference. But I don't recollect any other side effects other particularly. One is advised very strongly not to drink any alcohol, and at the time, I think most of the time I did steer clear of alcohol, not always though, but alcohol's not a good idea when you're feeling stressed or anxious or depressed anyway, but that didn't necessarily mean that I was always as sensible as I could have been at that point.
One of the things is that a lot of people simply don't understand depression. And when they see someone around them who is depressed, they're likely to think, well, why can't you just pull your socks up and just snap out of it? That's not because they're being unkind, they simply don't understand it. So what would you say to someone who is experiencing that aspect of it?
What if they're encountering that from someone around them?
Well, both. One, for the person who says, well, why can't they just snap out of it? And second, the person who's experiencing that.
Okay, well, for anyone who knows anyone who's got any form of mental health issue, but I suppose what I know about is depression. It would be like saying to someone who's got a broken leg, sort yourself out. You wouldn't say that. So the difficulty with mental illness is that you might look completely fine. In fact, you might function in some ways completely fine, and yet actually you're really dealing with something. And so if there's someone around you, close to you, whatever, who's saying they're dealing with depression or something like that, then I think there are two things I would say. One is make sure that that person is getting appropriate professional support, and two is be prepared to listen to them, and also not feel that you need to fix them. I think possibly, especially for our profession, we like to be able to fix things and resolve problems and sort things out. And if you can't, it can be extremely frustrating, particularly if it's going on for a long time. And there are organisations who are set up to support people whose family or friends have issues with mental health problems. So access them. And you can just listen to the person and just be with them in whatever they're dealing with.
I'll come to the profession in a moment because you've mentioned that, but just another point that you've just made about mental health issues. And again, a lot of people feel that they don't want to be stigmatized with that idea that they have a mental health problem. How did you overcome that yourself and accept, yes, I've got something, I don't understand it, and I need help?
Well, it happened a few times, so I can't remember exactly how many times I had an experience of depression. It was certainly 4 or 5, I would say. And sometimes I took medication and sometimes I didn't. I think I took antidepressants on 3 occasions, I think, twice, but it's a long time since I've had any issue with it, thankfully. So it's I can't quite remember, I'm afraid. But in terms of saying I need to go and get help, I mean, so how it would affect me is I would just be tearful pretty much all the time, and that doesn't work very well for sort of, it's, you can be like that with your friends, I guess, your close friends, your family. It's pretty difficult for them, and it's no fun for me or whoever it is that's experiencing that. But in terms of work, that just clearly doesn't work at all. But so there would be it, and I suppose the more familiar I became with the symptoms, then the more likely I was to go and get some form of help. And I did do that at times. And sometimes I remember one particular occasion where I felt very, very low in mood and depressed, and the doctor prescribed me medication, and I had a big case going on at the start of the year. this was over Christmas, I think. I felt very unhappy and depressed. I mean, I want to be responsible with how I'm saying it. There's a difference between being unhappy and being depressed. I think at that point I was experiencing a mild depression, and I went to the doctors, and I was prescribed antidepressants, and then I had a big case, I think the following week. So I thought, I don't want to start taking these now because of the side effects that we were just talking about. I don't want to start taking anything in case it's going to impact me further. So I didn't take them. I had to throw myself completely into the trial. And actually, because I had something else to focus on other than what was going on in my head, by the time I finished the trial, which was something like a week or so of pretty much working solidly, as you know we do sometimes, by the time it out of the other side of the trial, I was okay, because I'd had something else to concentrate on. But that was one occasion, and there were several others where that wouldn't have worked, and I needed to look after myself by taking the medication that I was advised to take. But yeah.
But Jo, you're no longer at the bar. We'll come to that in a moment. But when you were at the bar, apart from that time when you had to take on that long case, how did you manage your own depression along with the really relentless level of work and expectations that are placed on a busy barrister?
I think I just got on with it. Don't remember speaking to my colleagues about it. I don't remember really speaking to my head of chambers about it. I don't remember speaking to my clerks about it. I think I may have done, but I think I made it very personal. I thought it was some kind of reflection on me as a person at the time. I wasn't cutting it, or I wasn't strong enough or something. I think I had a whole load of sort of stories I made up about it that and I felt embarrassed, or ashamed, and it definitely seemed to me at the time that there was something wrong with me, that I kept getting this, stressed out and upset and worried and so on. That definitely, for me, I wasn't supposed to be like that. And looking back, I think it's incredibly common for people to feel stressed, certainly, whether it amounts to or amounts to some form of clinical mental health issue. I couldn't say, but I think that, well, you and I have worked together on well-being issues. I think what's absolutely important, which I didn't do a lot of the time, and which I didn't answer earlier on, is I didn't really talk to people about it, and I wasn't open about it with people, and that made it very lonely. And it felt, I think at times I felt like, well, I can't cope with this. I don't know. And I didn't know what to do, really. And I know there are organisations, there's Law Care and there's other things which are around for people, but I didn't really know about them at the time. And I'm not sure how much I really was prepared to acknowledge that that's what was going on in the context of our profession. Yeah, that wasn't great, and it's not ideal to do that. And thankfully, the profession is much more sensitive and attuned to the reality of people's lives, in fact, because I think the figures are something like 1 in 3 people throughout their life will experience some form of mental health problem. I suspect it may be higher, but anyway, I think in the legal profession, I don't know if it's higher than that statistic, but that's a lot of people. And even if it is 1 in 3, that's a lot of people who don't talk about it, for sure, because I know a very few who have. Me being one of my former head of chambers, Bernard Richmond being another one who's been open about that, which I think is really fantastic that he's been courageous enough to open up about that. But it is happening more, which is very good and welcome, because it's the reality of people's lives. It doesn't mean anything about people. It's like saying if you got the flu, that it would mean something about who you are as a person. It just means you've got the flu. Same thing with depression, as far as I'm concerned. It has no other, it means absolutely nothing about us. It's just something that we have experienced.
Yeah. A lot of people have had fears about the lockdown period and the effect on mental health. How are you coping with it?
When it started, or when it became apparent that we were going to have to go into lockdown, I was concerned about it, because of having experienced depression in the past, not for near 6 years or something now, since I was last unwell, I think. Yes, that's about right. So I was worried about it, and I thought, how am I going to be with this? And and actually I've been remarkably well. And obviously, you know, of course I've had my moments where I think, when is this going to be over? I've felt sad, I've felt worried about my family. So I live alone. My parents are isolating. My mother had a bout of cancer, mild cancer, stage 1 last year, so she's been told she has to isolate with, so my dad and her are doing that together. So I'm not with people, and it has been obviously challenging, as it is for everyone, and I was quite concerned that I would get really anxious, that I would feel really miserable, so on and so on. I wasn't sure how I would respond to it, and I have to say it's been remarkably okay, 90% of the time probably. And I put that down to the personal development work that I've done, which has also made a difference in how my mental resilience really overall, which is, you know, another reason why I think I haven't had a recurrence of depression since I started doing that work. What it has enabled me to do. Yeah, sure. Well, I did a course 6 years ago almost now, called the Landmark Forum, and that's a personal development course, and it's about removing barriers to anything that we want to achieve in life. It could be happiness, it could be a relationship, it could be something to do with work, it could be family, it doesn't matter what it is. Fitness could be anything. It's extremely powerful work, and since I did that, I have found my ability to deal with what life, you know, gives to us as part of being alive. My mum being diagnosed with cancer last year, for example, things that have happened in my life, relationship breakups, things that haven't gone as well as I wanted professionally, any and all situations. The work that the way the Landmark Forum works has been incredibly beneficial to everything in my life, which is why I now am so involved there. Really it's enabled me to see that when I have a thought, what used to happen before when I got very anxious, say for example, was I would be like a stuck record, and I'd get anxious. There'd be something that happened, a stressful case, for example, or something in my family or something, and I would have a thought about it, and then I would basically get stuck in a cycle of anxiety, which, if I didn't look after it very, very carefully immediately, was likely to spiral down into overwhelming feelings of stress and anxiety, and ending up with me being depressed. So normally what would happen if I had an experience of depression was there'd be some incident or a series of incidents, and the combination of them plus my being worried about being worried would lead to me experiencing depression. And now I don't do that anymore. And so in this period of lockdown, when I've felt sad or anxious or upset, I've been able to say to myself, okay, I'm feeling sad and anxious and upset. That's what's happening, no problem. Even if it's lasted a couple of days, that's been okay. And then I've come out the other side of it. And before, I don't think that, in fact, I'm confident that wouldn't have happened. It's been incredibly beneficial. And the other thing that in the work of Landmark, what we're looking at always is creating a future. What future do we want to create? What do I want for my life? Even in these circumstances, who do I want to be in the face of the lockdown? And who I want to be is a contribution to people, joyful, happy, calm, whatever that is. And then I can be that now, even when the circumstances are obviously not ideal.
One of the things I know you're heavily into is meditation. And yes, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about how that's helped you.
Well, it's a similar sort of thing, really. See, in meditation, it's the emphasis is on noticing thoughts and relating to them as thoughts and nothing else. So not that my thoughts mean something, not that I have to do something with them, I have to figure something out, none of that. So if you imagine that one of the ways it's talked about is that the mind is like the sky, and thoughts are like clouds. And you know, if you see clouds in the sky, you don't try and work them out, you just think, right, they're going to pass. And thoughts are like that. And the practice of meditation, but definitely meditation is to simply relate to the thoughts as thoughts, and notice them, acknowledge them, and just let them move on, because they will. And then there'll be other ones coming along, but rather than getting caught up in them. So that's also very useful.
Jo, thank you so much for being so candid, really, about your own experiences and giving us some insight into how to make things better. I'm sure if anyone wants to ask you any questions, you'd be willing to answer those if anyone writes into us.
Yeah, for sure. With pleasure.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jo Shaw.
Thank you, Rena.